I agree. You and I agree on this, but so what are the barriers? Why aren't we doing this?
So I think there are a number of things. One, it gets down to the way the legislation was written. Yep. And the words that we use for promising practice, well-supported, and supported. There was a period of time when Congress had a temporary authorization to allow states to get reimbursement. Programs were either supported or well-supported. Now we're back to what the traditional legislation says, which is it has to be 50% of well-supported. This is why I worry about states just looking at those well-supported programs without the knowledge of what do they actually need in their community.
Yep. So, exactly right. So we have 50 states. How do we manage this? Partnering then with the states and their programs.
So I will say there is progress being made, which is good. We are seeing states investing more in prevention through 4E. There are growing numbers of programs being approved by the clearinghouse. I do think reauthorization of 4B plays an important role here. States can use 4B to test a program that's not yet approved on the clearinghouse. They can test it, they can say, yeah, this meets our needs, and then hopefully it will get through the approval process. I do think that approval process needs to be sped up.
Yep, thank you so much for that. Mrs. Peterson, I just got a question after Congressman Kildee noted. So if you had to look back, okay, and you were in, what, 12 homes or something like that? What was the root cause, of these families and changing homes and all this stuff? I mean, do you have any solutions to say, all right, we don't want this for other children? What happened to you?
Yes, my time in care, the second time I went into care, I was in care as a teenager. And we know that teenagers, it is hard to find placements for them, more so than it is young children. Teenagers in foster care are stigmatized and viewed very unfairly. I was a 4.0 student, I was a good athlete, and it was hard for me to find placement, and it was hard for me to retain placement because foster parents want to adopt little children. And so little children would come into the home, and then I would be moved to the next home. And there's a lot of rules in the foster care system revolving youth in foster care, and the Normalcy Act passed, which I mentioned earlier, after I had emancipated, but a lot of those rules I didn't follow, and I would be kicked out of homes. Those rules were rules that my peers did not follow because they weren't putting me in danger. They were just, I wanted to have a normal experience as a teenager, as any teenager would. And so I was either usually moved out because the family was establishing their family through adoption or because of rules that I didn't follow.
Thank you for that. We need solutions, and I yield back.
Mr. Carey.
I want to thank the chair, and as a point of personal privilege today, my mother and father were divorced when I was probably no more than 3 or 4 months old, but today is my mother's birthday. So I'm not sure how many people are watching C-SPAN, but I know that she is, so happy birthday, Mother. Listen, I just want to tell you, this is some of the bipartisan stuff that many of us got elected to Congress to actually do. Many of us don't like to shout at the rain all day. We want to find solutions. And I wish that many of you could join us for our lunch in between. You know, I was with my dear colleague on the Democratic side, Schweikert, and we had a great discussion about this issue, not for the cameras, but I just want you to know that there are people in Congress, whether they're Republican, whether they're Democrat, whether they're independent, that really want to keep this country moving forward. And this is a big issue that we do have bipartisan support. So to that end, Mr. Chairman, I also want to thank you for having this hearing. I want to thank the ranking member as well. But I also want to thank the witnesses for being here today to discuss this critical need to reauthorize the 4B of the Social Security Tax Act. Last week, alongside my dear friend, Representative Larson, I introduced the Promoting Community-Based Prevention Services Act. This legislation will allow states greater flexibility in their allocations of funds to family resource centers. When parents feel supported, families thrive, and that is why I'm proud to help guarantee these resources can be available in every community across the country for every family that might need them. Ms. Hilton, I do want to say you've got a tremendous team, and I see some of them behind you today. They work extremely hard. They are in our offices a lot, talking about the issues that are very important to you, and all credit to your team on that. Family First requires the Qualified Residential Treatment Programs, or the QRTPs, to have a licensed clinical staff available 24/7. Based on your advocacy and experience, are these staffing requirements being met consistently and effectively?
Well, thank you. My team and I love working with you and your team, and happy birthday to your mom as well.
Thank you.
And I appreciate the committee's work on Family First. I'm not a policy expert, but based on my lived experience, the staff are untrained and unfit to work with children. Licensed staff is important, but the floor staff, the people who do the overnight shifts and the hard work, they need to be looked at as well. These facilities keep staffing costs as low as possible to increase the bottom line. In my case, many staff enjoyed abusing the children because they knew they could get away with it. They would take kids to rooms without cameras, beat them up, and physically and sexually abuse them. There's a lot of sexual abuse that happens. I just heard a situation right now where a 12-year-old foster youth is pregnant because she was sexually abused by staff. I think we need stronger oversight over who works with children, as children are dying at the hands of these staff.
And really, as kind of as a follow-up to that, what further training or education requirements should be imposed on staff in these facilities to better support and protect our youth, in your opinion?
I think that there needs to be checks on these people and background checks as well, and they need to be trained in how to deal with children. And I think that you guys could speak better on that.
Well, that's all right. I'm about down to a minute, and I appreciate your testimony, Ms. Peterson. I did want to talk to you. But Mr. Geen, I wanted to touch upon something, because your opening testimony, all of you, mentioned the young people that are in foster care, that are through the adoption process today, and that help is on the way, and that we want them to be, we want them to know that there's something on the other side. And to that end, your founder, Mr. Thomas, Thomas has been a legend, not only in Columbus and the 15th Congressional District, but across the world. And what I want people to know today, I know his daughter, Lori, is a dear friend of mine. His granddaughter, Allie, is a good friend of mine. But what he was able to do, given his situation, and if you look at the franchisees with the Wendy's Corporation across the country, because of what he did, he created more than 200,000 jobs. Every life matters. And I want everybody who's listening and watching today to know that. And I appreciate all of you coming in here today. It means a lot. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Panetta.
Nice job, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Ladies, gentlemen, thanks for being here. And of course, thanks to Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Neal for having this hearing on not just an important issue, as obviously you understand, but also you're hearing, we understand that. What I mean by that, this is a bipartisan issue, which I want to echo the sentiments of my colleague, Mr. Carey, as to when it comes down to these types of issues. You know, good governing isn't sexy sometimes, but let me tell you, good governing is good politics in my book. And so I appreciate you being a part of this good governing that you're seeing right here today. However, as you've testified, though, you know, we want to make sure that we can do everything we can to ensure the well-being of our foster youth. There was a 2022 Government Accountability Office report that unfortunately revealed that there are an absolutely alarming amount of instances of maltreatment, and abuse in federally funded youth residential treatment centers. And in that report, the GAO recommended certain steps that need to be taken to address the abuse, but also how federal agencies can support local agencies and also make sure that there is better oversight. That is why I'm working and partnering with my colleague, Greg Stubbe, on this committee on the bipartisan H.R. 8817, a bill that would mandate relevant federal agencies to collect the appropriate data, collaborate to develop guidance and best practices for those states receiving Title IV-B funds, and report on how we can improve the well-being of youth and residential treatment facilities. The goal of this bill is to provide proper oversight for those youth residential programs that receive federal funding. And we've consulted with a number of federal agencies on our bill, and the agencies that would be mandated to share this information and collaborate include HHS, Department of Education, the Administration for Children and Families, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the Department of Justice, and, I quote, other policy experts. Mr. Green, my first question to you, who should those other policy experts be, in your opinion? And are there any agencies that we should be consulting with on this matter?
So I would be remiss if I didn't answer this question looking at the people next to me. One of the folks who needs to be, or the category of folks that needs to be involved, are people who have lived experience in the system. They need to have a voice into making sure that what is being developed is sound. Let me also say that we absolutely need to be able to collect data on the abuses in these facilities. That's not enough. Would you place your child at a facility that you knew didn't abuse them? Well, that is the minimum you possibly need. You want to look at quality. You want to make sure that they are not taking in young people who don't need to be there. You want to make sure they're not holding on to young people for longer periods of time than they need the intervention. I mean, what difference does it make? They'll continue to get paid. You want to make sure, as another one of your colleagues mentioned, there's not the abuse of psychotropic drugs or policy pharmacy use. So as we look into this accountability, it goes far beyond just saying they're not abusing kids.
Understood, and that's exactly why in that bill, we want these agencies to come up with best practices for the states that are receiving these types of funds. Let me take it one step further, though, Mr. Green. Obviously, we have a direct role overseeing funds that place children in these settings, but we don't have the same power of the purse when it comes to private facilities and private insurance. Can you talk to us about the leverage that can be used over private facilities that are not paid through the Title IV-B program?
It is my understanding, and again, there are people on this panel who may know differently than I, that many of these private institutions are serving kids from multiple different populations. Some are caring for foster kids, juvenile justice kids, truant kids, the rest. And so I think having all of those agencies at the table to talk about their use would be important and could advise you.
With 30 seconds left, would anybody want to add to that answer as to what type of leverage we could use over private industries and private residential treatment facilities?
Let me just add one thing, because this has come up over and over again. Private institutions aren't by nature evil. There are private facilities that are probably doing good work. There are nonprofit facilities that are doing work that is at least abusive, if not more. And so while I appreciate the question, I want to make sure that we look at the totality and not focus on one or the other.
Absolutely, and that's why I focused on both, basically, those facilities that are receiving federal funds and private facilities as well, and obviously making sure that we come up with solutions to ensure proper oversight on both. Thank you. Thanks to all of you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Malliotakis.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you all for being here. It's been obviously a very difficult, heartbreaking hearing, but very important that we put the spotlight on these atrocities that are happening and that we work together for solutions to end the abuse of these children. You know, I represent New York City, and in New York City, sadly, there have been a number of instances over the last few years of children that were killed. They were killed either by their parent because their cases fell through the cracks. We had one child, a 3-year-old, who was beaten by their father. ACS knew about it, but he was taken away and then put back into the home, which was a homeless shelter, and he ended up being beaten to death. Another 3-year-old who was in a foster care foster home, and ended up with a drug overdose and died. how do we work with these local agencies? What can the federal government do to have more accountability for these local agencies? Because it is a balancing act, right? We had this whole hearing about how we don't want to unnecessarily take children from their homes if we can help rectify the situation. But then on the other hand, you have these children that are falling through the cracks. They know there's an issue, but they leave them there, and then they ended up dead. Do you have any thoughts, any of you, Mr. Geen in particular, about what we can do as a federal government to try to hold some accountability for our local partners?
So I'll start by saying that a single child death involved in the system is a tragedy. And we also can learn from those instances, and localities do child death reviews and use the information from those reviews to talk about how could we prevent this in the future. At the same time, we don't want to make the problem seem larger than it is. The child fatality issue is an important one, but we don't want to expand it to make it, we think that it is larger than it actually is.
Okay. I still think that we need to have more accountability measures to find out why those children fell through the cracks, why they were neglected. Was it a staffing issue, or is it something that's a little bit...
And recognizing the impossible decision that we're putting upon, and I'll be stereotypic, a 20-something-year-old new caseworker making a decision with very limited information. It is unfortunate, a tragedy that children die. It is impossible to make that best decision. Removing the child harms them, causes them trauma. It is often not the best scenario, and so we don't want to overreact to a child death as well. Making policy based on small number of incidents usually lead to outcomes that do more harm than good.
Well, thank you. I am proud to sponsor the bill being advocated for by you, Ms. Hilton, Stop Institutionalized Child Abuse Act. I think it's a really great step. I know that you've had some success in passing this legislation on the state level. Can you talk a little bit about the changes that you've seen happening in the states as a result of this similar legislation?
Yes, we've helped pass 9 state laws, but that's not enough. It needs to be on a federal level. But the positive part about it is that people know that they're being watched, but abuse is still happening and children are still dying in the name of treatment. So that's why the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act is so important, and thank you for supporting it. I really appreciate that.
Today, NBC came out with an article that says the states failed to track abuse in foster care facilities housing thousands of children, and this was based on a U.S. Health and Human Resources Office of Inspector General report. We talked about transparency, the need to report these instances of abuse, and for states to share the information, because if you have a facility operating in one state and they're operating in other states, and those states are still contracting with that same company, that's an issue. What other transparency measures would you like to see that could help us with the accountability and oversight component? Well, I have another question if you want to. Let me get this question, then you can expand because I'm running out of time. The topic of Social Security benefits being garnished by states for foster care has been a growing issue, and we know that a small portion of foster youth are eligible for SSI benefits, sometimes inheritance from their parents who passed away, and this can be particularly helpful for them when they as they work to prepare to transition from foster care, maybe give them a basis to start with. And I'm concerned about the lack of transparency of that issue and these SSI benefits being taken by the states. Could you comment on that, and if that's something we should look to reform?
Sure, and I think transparency in that is essential. I also think it's an incredibly complex issue. Children often come into care without SSI benefits, and they get SSI benefits because the state agency applies on their behalf. They then use that money to reimburse themselves for a portion of the cost. There's a concern, at least among some, that if states are told they're not going to be able to use any of that SSI money, they won't go through the trouble of applying for SSI for children. So we want to make sure that children who would be eligible are going to be found eligible, and if the child welfare agency doesn't do it, they may wind up leaving care still without SSI benefits. In addition, if a child had SSI benefits with a parent, the parent could use a portion of the SSI benefits to care for the child. So there probably is some middle ground here between the idea of you're not allowed to use any of the SSI funds for any state purpose versus we get to take all of it and you don't get anything. And so I think that it's a complex discussion that's worthy of further debate.
Yeah, I think certainly the committee should examine it further and would love to work with you more on how we can come to a good equal ground on that. Thank you.
Last but certainly not least, Mr. Gomez.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. First, let me thank all of you for being here on this important topic. Ms. Hilton, I'm happy to have a fellow Angelino here. I'm proud to represent Los Angeles and Washington. And just thank you for sharing your story. When I was getting briefed by my staff about the hearing and about the issues, they told me about your story, and I was thinking about how much time you must have spent, and I was thinking months, not years. So just to hear the fact that you were in this facility for 2 years is just astonishing to me, especially like knowing, I know some people that were in the California Youth Authority for less time. So it's mind-boggling that somebody can be held. So, and at the same time, they told me about how your advocacy has been very thoughtful and has been moving the ball forward. So thank you so much. And I'm a new parent. I have a 22-month-old toddler. I have the scars to prove it, physical scars from him trying to bite me once in a while. But I know that we're trying to do more here. And that's why one of the things I did was I started the Dads Caucus so that dads would actually do more at home to help raise children, but also for dads to do more here in the halls of Congress to fight for family-friendly policies that really help kids and families everywhere. And in your testimony, Ms. Hilton, you mentioned that families need resources and support so they don't need to come into the child welfare system in the first place. Could you elaborate on the need for more federal resources for children?
I think it's really important because a lot of the things that are happening to these children is because they don't have the funds, and then they're going to be going into the system because of that. And sometimes their families can't afford to take care of them, and it's just heartbreaking that because of that reason that they would be taken away and then locked away in these facilities and being abused. So I just think it's important for that to be taken care of before, so that they will never have to go into the system and be put through this abuse.
And I agree with you. A lot of what we want to try to prevent is to prevent these children from entering into the foster system in the first place, to have smart policies, a national paid family leave program, so people can take the time off to care for a kid. The child tax credit. We did pass a bipartisan bill here that did, that's not what we would have written as Democrats, but it was still a good bill. We moved it forward. Affordable child care, because too many families are struggling, and we have to think about how do we help parents make it a little bit easier on them to raise those kids. And as a new dad, I kind of realized we do a lot in how we influence how a child is raised. It's almost like what you put in is what you get back. And making it easier for them, parents, to do that is crucial. And we're going to keep fighting for those. Also, one issue on the foster care system is when it comes to LGBTQ youth. Because what I've read in certain reports is that LGBTQ youth represent about 30% of all children in the foster care system. 5% are considered identified as transgender. What can we do to support those children? Because those are often the ones that don't end up ever finding a home, living on the streets, and then often being put in terrible situations. Ms. Mansfield?
I'm not sure that I have the answer to that, unfortunately, but I will speak from my own experience growing up with foster siblings, that my brother originally could not be placed because they identified that he should not be in a home environment because of his sexual orientation. And no child should be labeled like that or not be placed in a home environment because of that. It is a huge issue, and I wish I had the solutions to it. I do not. But I appreciate you bringing that up because it is something that comes up frequently, both for children in foster care, as well as those children who then become adults and often become the incarcerated mothers that I work with as well.
Thank you. My time is up. I just want to thank the chairman. Although we don't always see eye to eye on solutions, we do believe that there is a problem that we have to be that has to be dealt with. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I want to thank each and every one of you for spending the time on this important hearing, hearing your powerful testimony. It definitely is making a difference. Please be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal hearing record today. With that, the committee stands adjourned.